Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. This is Culture Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Laura K. Field. Laura, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. And thanks for having me. I'm a political theorist by training and have been writing in recent years about the conservative intellectuals who have sort of lined up behind Trump and tried to justify the Trump administration. And I'm a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center and I've had an affiliation, with American University as well.
Well, thank you for taking the time to come on. So we're going to be talking about a piece that you wrote and published in The Bulwark a couple weeks ago. The headline is "What the Hell Happened to the Claremont Institute?" Subhead: How the once distinguished conservative think tank plunged into Trumpism, illiberalism, and lying about the election. The link will be below on the blogging site. It's a long piece, and I encourage people to check it out. I thought it was really interesting. And okay, so I guess we'll start with a very basic question. What is the Claremont Institute for people who have heard of it and don't know what it is, or have never heard of it at all?
Yeah, so this is a think tank that was founded in 1979 by Harry Jaffa, who was at the time a prominent Lincoln scholar and well-regarded Lincoln scholar. I think that you'll hear people across the political spectrum today express real reverence for some of Jaffa's work on Lincoln. But I think he then some of his students, it wasn't founded by him, it was founded by four of his students. And so they took up his call, I think, his way of appreciating the American founding and then Lincoln in particular. And they founded this institute sort of as a kind of out of devotion to the American founding and the American principles. And so it's this think tank devoted to sort of restoring an appreciation for the founding. And it's been around for quite a long time, and it's in Claremont, California. And people who are listening or watching might be familiar probably with Michael Anton, who wrote this famous Flight 93 election essay that sort of gave this a pretty sophisticated intellectual defense of Trump before the 2016 election, and that sort of went viral. It was read on Rush Limbaugh. And so that became kind of a catalyst for the Claremont group. The Claremont group published that piece pseudonymously at the time, and then it caught on, and they sort of went with it when Trump won the election. They sort of fell in behind that and became this one conservative institution that really decided to kind of go all in on Trumpism and defend him and tried to shape his administration in certain ways. So there's a long between the sort of founding of the Claremont Institute and then sort of these things that happened with Anton and subsequently. There's a lot we could talk about there, right? In a way, I asked the piece's title, "What the Hell Happened to the Claremont Institute?" But it's kind of a narrow. I don't actually tell that whole story of sort of how, which I think there is a sort of an intellectual history there that you can trace out some of the links between the ideology or philosophy of this institution and then how it eventually came around to fall for Trump or to kind of be willing to go there. Yeah. I tell some of that story in the piece, but I really wanted to kind of shine a light on some very specific things that they were involved in between the election and January 6th.
Okay. And so there's a podcast called Know Your Enemy, and I've had one of the hosts of that show on here before, Matt Sitman, and they did a episode, and which has the great title. I have it here, "Midnight in the Garden of American Heroes," and we'll include the link to that. And so that gives more background.
It's a great episode.
Harry Jaffa and Claremont, and it's. As someone who I don't think I really knew that much about any of this before hearing that episode, and so that probably what made me interested in reading your piece, and so that I encourage people to listen to that. And so, and it is confusing because there's the Claremont Institute, and then there's Claremont McKenna and then the Claremont colleges, and then there's like a dozen different things, and some of them have Claremont in them. Some of them are like legitimate higher education institutes, and some of them are something a little less maybe.
Well, and there's legitimate. There is some overlap. The people who founded the Claremont Institute, many of them, Charles Kessler is still a professor at Claremont Mechanic College, I believe, or graduate university. So you've got these Claremont schools, and there's some overlap with faculty who belong to the Claremont Institute, but the Claremont Institute the existence of the Claremont Institute should not reflect back on those other institutions, even though there's overlap because they're separate entities.
Right. And then they have all these sort of fellowships and things where they're connected to a lot of different people. And so you note that maybe being a Claremont fellow or something, like there's people who are, very highly regarded who have gone through their fellowship stuff, and like Ross Douthat is an example of that. And then there's people who are somewhere in between well-regarded and not well-regarded. And you list Josh Hammer, Molly Hemingway, Christopher Rufo, and Ben Shapiro. Obviously some of those, like Ben Shapiro is a huge online superstar, and Rufo is the guy who is spearheading the anti-CRT stuff. Molly Hemingway is at the Federalist, and I think isn't Josh Hammer the editorial or head of opinion at Newsweek or something now?
I think he is now,
but then also sometimes they bring in people who are a little less reputable, and so people like Charlie Kirk, who founded Turning Point USA, and this guy Jack Sobiek, is that how you say his name?
Sobiek, I'm not sure either.
Who sort of like helped popularize the original Pizzagate conspiracy theory that QAnon grew out of. And so there's like a wide range of people who have intersected with Claremont, from the Ross Douthat, maybe one of the most respected conservative intellectuals in America, to these more sort of
and I mean I list those people. There are plenty of people who have gone through there who are very respectable, right? And I should say they've sort of founded themselves based on sort of education surrounding the principles of America, right? Like the Declaration and so forth. But they're sort of, they run a whole bunch of different programs for different kinds of fellows during the summertime, and sort of educational programs, and a lot of whom it's not just academics, it's also journalists, it's also lawyers and things who come through that, who go through that program. And you can click through and see all the different fellows who have gone through there on their website. And you'll if you follow the conservative movement at all, you'll recognize some of those names. But I guess one thing just to maybe add on this is that they're sort of doggedly anti-wonk, right? So they're really about like promoting myth. I mean, they wouldn't put it this way, but they're about sort of political philosophy and how ideas and principles matter. And they're like, we're about the culture war. We're about shaping the American mind. And they're not, and that kind of dovetails with an anti-administrative state position that's kind of typical among Republicans, right? And some of that is very legitimate concerns about government. But they've really taken that on as part of their mission, is sort of they don't really have policy ideas. They're very much in this for the fight. Is how
the grand philosophical claims and so forth. Okay, so one thing. Okay, so Jaffa's sort of students, disciples founded this organization. And so Jaffa is sort of the intellectual godfather of it. And Jaffa was a student of Leo Strauss. And so then there's, the podcast that I mentioned earlier gets into all this backstory. But so then you have, correct me if I'm wrong, so the East Coast Straussians, as they came to be called, sort of became the neoconservatives, or were termed the neoconservatives. And people who are associated with that is like Paul Wolfowitz, who was, I believe, a student of Strauss, or at least maybe a minor student of Strauss. But and then Jaffa's group was like the West Coast Straussians, because he went to California. And Jaffa's how does so as I understand it, Jaffa sort of made the conservative case for Lincoln, and because there was plenty of anti-Lincoln sentiment in the right, in the 20th century. And then Jaffa would debate people and say no, actually Lincoln was a great conservative hero, because, there's people who saw him as a tyrant, or people who were just out and out racist or segregationists who were anti-Lincoln. And so he was like, no, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Lincoln was a conservative, a great conservative, and a great American.
Yeah.
So is that all accurate?
Well, that I wouldn't. I think that's right on Jaffa. I'm sort of. I think on the East Coast Straussian question, that's a little too simple. And let me just say, like, I've studied with East Coast Straussians for most of my academic life. So I got a PhD with some of these people in Austin, Texas, and I mean, they were very good to me. But I've always kind of been I'm kind of a bad Straussian. I believe in, so it's kind of awkward to be here defending any of this, but the East Coast Straussians, I'd say they're not really neoconservatives per se. I'd say maybe some of them are, but so are some of the West Coast Straussians. I'd say generally sort of West Coast Straussians take a more active involvement in politics and see a more active role for themselves in politics. Whereas a lot of East Coast Straussians are just hyper apolitical, and they kind of turn their nose up at ordinary politics. And in a way, there's some of that among the kind of West Coast Straussians too, which I think is maybe not something that it's hard to kind of understand without having been in these circles. But there's a real, I mean, maybe it's obvious, but there's like a real disdain and contempt for sort of ordinary political life. And so someone like Michael Anton, I mean, I don't think this is a person who has like sincere, I think he's an ideologue who believes a lot of the stuff he says, but there's like real disdain for sort of electoral politics. And there's sort of there's this kind of self-aggrandizing sense that they are the philosopher kings who are shaping or the like something like that uber, you know. So it's that I don't know what my point is with respect to Straussianisms, but there's a whole, like, not all Straussians are like that. A lot of them really take a back step for that, even, but it's still kind of, there's still a kind of conceit there.
Okay, so Leo Strauss was this one very influential, you know, philosopher, intellectual, and then he influenced many people, and so we're sort of crudely grouping him into various, you know, areas. But you know, I had never heard of Leo Strauss, I guess, before like the time, like the Bush administration.
Yeah, the Bush administration,
and where some of his disciples or his. But anyway, you know, sort of like the idea of esoteric readings of philosophy and history, and also this idea of, like you were alluding to, sort of like the noble lie, or like you sort of need to say something to the masses because they're not going to understand really what's happening because they don't have this training in esoteric readings of like Thucydides or whatever, and so that sort of became what, as understood at least popularly during the Bush administration, was like, you know, it's okay to lie about weapons of mass destruction, and we sort of know what we're doing. And because of something, you know, Socrates said, then that means that, so on and so forth. And then, I don't know, the collapse of the Bush administration seemed to sort of push all that stuff away from public discourse. And then, but then I guess it was
and I think that's,
in the background.
I think that's kind of, I mean, I think that's fair. I don't know exactly. I don't know those. I can't get in the heads of the sort of neocons of the Bush era, because I think that it's also sort of wedded to, for many of these people, a genuine belief in sort of American democracy, sort of and liberal democracy, and sort of a hope that can be promoted around the world. That, I mean, proved to be just sort of tragically naive or badly done, but I think there's still something sincere in a lot of that. And I think that there's sort of a through line with all these Straussians in that they have a kind of an attentiveness to, just cultural arguments in the sweep of history in a way that sometimes, I think liberals don't, or fail to, right? Or some people on the left fail to so there's some things that I think they've got a deeper understanding of, or some of these Straussians do. I don't think the Claremont people, I just sort of mean in these intellectual circles, there are some serious insights there sometimes about history that are worth taking seriously, that I think has given them, in a way, it's mostly just like that. That's what has allowed them maybe to get close to power regularly in these ways.
So how did four people who were the students of a renowned Lincoln scholar come to be the people who, were the intellectual or position themselves as like the intellectuals providing support for Donald Trump, who in some ways is like the 100-degree opposite of everything Abraham Lincoln like ever was or whatever. Like, what do you understand that?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the longer question. I think that what I try to lay out in the article is that part of it has to do with a kind of idealism, that there's a kind of idealizing reading of the founding, and sort of this myth making surrounding these older generations, right? That then becomes a kind of state ideology among these people in these circles, right? So that it becomes just this really stultified set of beliefs and understandings, and then I think that if you've got this that becomes very resistant to constitutional change or progressivism of any kind, right? So you've got a very sort of sticky understanding and kind of narrow-minded understanding of how the American regime should operate, and how it should be talked about and how it should be taught. I think that then you see over the course of time that things do change, right? And I think that for these people, that became increasingly difficult to accept and comprehend, and they found themselves sort of on the losing side of the culture war. I don't talk about this in the piece, but I think two things I don't talk about that maybe I should have a little bit more, sort of the Christian nationalism of some of these people. And then also just like there's a real homophobic streak even to Jaffa. And so you've kind of got the culture war issues, and the hatred of the left was kind of a staple in this crowd from the beginning, and a resistance to progressivism and the constitutional changes that came with like the New Deal, right? And these new government programs. So you have all this sort of resistance to change, but then you get a lot of change happening. And I think that kind of, they start to feel aggrieved, right? And like they're really on the losing side of something. And I mean, furthermore, you get them kind of ideologically, a lot of conservatives, I think, feel like they're sidelined in the academy. And they kind of are, because there's a lot of fragmentation, right? And so I think that one of the good explanations here is that they feel aggrieved. They feel like they're on the losing battle. It's festering. You get Obama comes in. It's all bundled up. Maybe not with some of these people with racism, but in the party, right? There's a lot of that. And so I think that by the time Trump comes along, it's just that he's such a great vehicle for so many of those frustrations that they can't help but and they're kind of yearning for a savior figure of some kind or something like that, because they're feeling so forlorn about the failure of their or the fact that their principles are looking kind of shoddy and people aren't respecting them, right? And there's all these challenges to their understanding of history.
Okay.
So that's what I try to like that. I mean, I don't fully understand it either. I mean, I was partly shocked by this when I saw it happening, and then partly, I mean, I think that's maybe a few threads. I think I think that also just like there are always going to be people who seize upon an opportunity, right? So it could happen to anybody, right? Where they get close to. I mean, Trump's a pretty shocking failure of judgment, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because you have these people who profess to like they believe in ideas and ideals, and those are the set forth by the founders, and then you have this figure who, Donald Trump, lots of people see him differently, but it's pretty clear that like he doesn't actually believe in anything except for himself. And yet somehow these people who, so there's plenty of people in the conservative movement, the Republican Party, who went along with Trump because they're like, well, people like this guy, so let's just go along with him and we can get our tax cuts passed and get whatever we want to do, we can maybe get him to do it, things with immigration and so forth. But then you have these people who are sort of like, see themselves as sort of like philosopher kings or something at like a 20,000 feet removed from the hurly-burly of shoddy politics. And then there's this con artist who stumbles into the presidency, and they're like, "This is our guy." So that, I mean,
but you see
there's
how it makes some
psychological
sense?
Explanations for this, I guess, but it is.
Well, they
strange.
have such disdain for politics in a way. Some of these guys, right? That it doesn't really matter who it is, right? There's I mean, I don't want to. They're all pretty different, right? Like, I think it's a combination of the fact that they really do think the country's going to shit, right? Like, so they've, I don't know if it's because they're too online, or maybe I just have I don't agree, right? I mean, I think that there are tons of really serious problems. I mean, so I don't want to be Pollyanna, but like, they think that we're on the verge of civil war, right? That it's worse than it's just like some
of them are sort of like egging on the civil war.
I mean, I think that's the problem. They're really fomenting a lot of this. So I think it's a really delusional little situation here. And I don't know. And I think it's honestly hard to know how seriously to take all of this, right? But I think that there's kind of there's this sense, a real conviction that things are kind of nearing the end days when it comes to sort of American republicanism and self-government and liberty. And so they really think that sort of the technocratic elites, if they're allowed to kind of keep going and keep socializing the country with new programs and the surveillance state, I mean, some of those concerns seem right to me, but they think, I mean, in terms of surveillance and stuff, they just think that they have a serious conviction that it's sort of a slippery slope, that we're basically already halfway down towards some sort of like the liberal tyranny, plus all the cultural tyranny that they feel so aggrieved about, which I think I find it very hard to get into that mindset because I think it's crazy. But I think that is what they believe. And so that's what justifies the Trump. Like that's the premise of Anton's piece, right?
Right.
And so it really, I think for them, they have this real conviction that they see more clearly, and that they're on the kind of cutting edge of a deep understanding of what's going on, and they're the heroes.
Okay, and so maybe one more question before we really dive into the piece. We're still sort of setting the table. Okay, so a question you didn't really discuss, and maybe you don't know this, like sort of who is paying for all this shit? And like, how do they have these huge programs that, fly out dozens of young conservatives and all this stuff, and who is funding, there was this meme online, who funds the Federalist, but really like, it doesn't take that much to fund an online magazine. It was probably just people were like, Saudi Arabia is funding the Federalist, but it's probably just like some guy who owns like 6 car dealerships in Louisiana or something. Like, it gives him a couple million a year. But so there's all this, but it's this huge operation. And then one possible answer is someone named Thomas D. Klingenstein, and he's the chairman of the board, and so it's like a nonprofit, and so often that goes to a huge funder. And then I was like, well, who is this guy? He seems to be some hedge fund guy or Wall Street guy or something. And then so he wrote. So then occasionally, I guess he's such a brilliant guy, they let him write things for the American Mind. And the first thing that chronologically he wrote in 2018 was called "Our House Divided: Multiculturalism versus America," a big photo of the Lincoln Monument, and then the subhead is "Following Trump's Lead and Lincoln's." So I didn't read this. I just saw it and thought it was funny. But I guess there's a very wealthy guy who is willing to subsidize all this nonsense. Yeah,
I mean, my understanding is that, and I'd like to look at this more carefully. I don't quite know how to do it, but I guess you can get the record. I think historically they've been founded by groups like the Bradley Family Foundation or the Earharts. I'm not sure about this, but I think you can go through the records of those different institutions and see if they've given to the Claremont Institute.
Yeah.
And then there's 990s where some of that is reported, but I don't know. It's kind of hard to find, but I think it can be figured out. And so I'd like to do that. But I think that Thomas Klingenstein is the major donor, is my understanding. And sort of he floats the operation. And since I wrote this, I've learned that it's a very complicated picture, because I do not think my sense from talking to people is that he would be he is like basically, I mean, if you haven't read the piece, you won't see what I'm getting at, but the piece takes us through to like, just to show some of the racism, right? That is sort of, that they're, even if they're not promoting, they're kind of right next to. And I think Thomas Klingenstein has written plays about Lincoln that was produced, a play about Lincoln that was produced off Broadway in like 2017. And he wrote another play about Frederick Douglass that was produced in Chicago a few years ago. And I think he thinks of himself as wholly, like, you know, appreciative of these two men, and he idolizes Lincoln. And so, I mean, I think that's all very genuine. And I think, so I don't quite understand what's going on there, and whether he's just not seeing what the rest of the organization is doing, or if he's kind of being used by these people. I mean, I just don't know. It's pretty weird, though.
Well, that's interesting. So this guy is a real Renaissance man, you know, making millions or billions on Wall Street, writing plays, funding, you know, intellectual movements. Maybe he, you know, modern dance or the arts, you know, a real, you know, Medici type, I guess. But yeah, I mean, okay. So actually, I wasn't sure I was asked this, but
okay.
So Leo Strauss was Jewish. Harry Jaffa was Jewish. A lot of the East Coast Straussians, at least through the first generation, were Jewish. And neoconservatism and had also a lot of people who were Jewish associated with it. And I remember, and so I can say all this because I too am Jewish, although I'm not a neoconservative, but I remember in the back of my head, I thought Michael Anton was Jewish. But then sort of looking at them like, okay, Klingenstein or whatever, it sounds like it could be a Jewish name, but who knows? But then a lot of the West Coast Straussians do not seem to be Jewish. And you like, is that sort of a split between, and then also a lot of the Jewish neoconservatives became NeverTrumpers, like Bill Kristol and you know, Jennifer Rubin. And there was a real revulsion, at least among part of the Jewish, you know, the Jewish conservative intellectual space against Trump. But then these guys, and they're almost all guys. And if you look at their, you know, like the board of the Claremont Institute, and then the people who are the editors of the American Mind and so forth, it's almost all men. It seems a less Jewish group of people. What is this accurate, or what do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable really like fully drawing that out, just because I don't know. But I mean, I've read Charles Kessler's book recently, and I don't believe he's Jewish, but he sort of quotes very admiringly a speech that I think George Washington gave at a synagogue, sort of this very beautiful welcome to the Jewish community. And so I think, you know, there's some, you know, there's something not awful there. But I don't really know. Yeah, I can't speak to that. I've heard from other people that there's more sort of, like I said, more sort of Christian nationalism underlying a lot of this than I've recognized. And I think that I just haven't sort of, I mean, I believe that and I see a lot of that, but I haven't done careful enough sort of sorting through of this or thinking about it from that angle to really know.
Okay. Yeah, so that's interesting, and okay, maybe someone else can examine that angle, or maybe you. But I think it is sort of like, you know, it is interesting to think about, you know, why did many neocons react so strongly against Trump, whereas a lot, like most of the rest of the conservative movement and the GOP just fell in line. And so the cynical, I think I talked about this in the episode with Matt. You know, the cynical reading is like, well, the Jewish neocons really just care about Israel. And then, and the sort of foreign policy adventurism that some people saw as like kind of ultimately supporting Israel's position in the Middle East. And then since Trump was like, didn't care about any of that shit, you know, the neoconservatives, this is like the character couldn't like use Trump as their puppet in the way that they used George W. Bush as their puppet. And so that's the cynical reading. And then the non-cynical reading is, well, a lot of these people are the children or grandchildren of people who fled Europe because of the Nazis, and they saw something in Trump that reminded them of the rise of Hitler. Obviously, Trump is not Hitler and was not Hitler, and but they had a legitimate sort of moral reaction against Trump, whereas a lot of the non-Jewish conservatives are like didn't have that moral revulsion, or if they did have it, they suppressed it. And so I think that if you see, I mean, so Bill Kristol, total opportunist, or like, true believer moralist who has made a lot of mistakes, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that some of these types, Max Boot, Rubin, and some of the people associated with the Bulwark, like Trump is gone, kind of. I mean, he's still hanging around, but they have not, like, they're still like against Trumpism and are sort of fighting trying to claim the GOP back or something. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I tend to think that these people, I mean, I know some of them a little bit, obviously writing with the Bulwark. I've met a couple of them, and I think they tend to be pretty sincere in their sort of devotion to some of these ideals. And I think you're right that they see something because of their own personal histories. But I mean, so I think that's all right. But I think that maybe we're underestimating the positive connection between sort of the extent to which the Claremont people genuinely affirm a Christian traditional values-based ethic, right? And so, or whatever that would, values-based, I don't mean that in a way like, you know what I mean? So I think that there's sort of I think there's an actual embrace of that. I mean, I agree it's absurd that they went for Trump, but I think that there's kind of a deep concern about the kind of moral decay, progressivism, homosexuality, gay marriage. I mean, these are people who resisted that for a long time and still do. And so I think that it's sort of more that sort of Christian angle, right, on the Christian right, I think is actually like a pretty powerful force for some of these people.
Okay, but is it strange that the institute founded by the four students of Harry Jaffa, who is Jewish, and who was the student of Leo Strauss, who is Jewish, is now like the Christian?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's absurd, right? I really do. But I think it's sort of I think it's tricky because I think they really do like, in a way, Jaffa was pretty careful, I think, and Kessler will deny that he believes this, but they sort of talk, the way they talk about the American founding, it's kind of like a perfect synthesis of sort of the Christian worldview sometimes, and it's not it's sort of, Judeo-Christian, right, is how they'll talk about it. But like,
emphasis on the Christian part usually.
Right.
But...
Well, usually, right. But I think that's pretty they're sincerely think that that's a tradition that has is worth sort of holding on to tightly. And then it's merged perfectly with these great institutional doctrines from the Enlightenment plus an ancient Republican spirit, right? So that's sort of where they're coming from. And I think that sincere devotion to that stuff makes it hard for them to accept things that aren't that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's maybe we've given a lot of sort of background without really talking about the piece. So let's talk more about the piece. And so,
right.
So Michael Anton is one of the people you look at, and so he wrote this essay, "The Flight 93 Election," in 2016, and he wrote it under a pseudonym, which is Publius Decius Mus. Is it Mus Mouse, or am I wrong about that? But that means something in Latin. And so, as I understand it, I don't think I ever read it, but it made sort of a splash when it came out. And this was when, the conservative movement and the conservative intellectuals were not on board with Trump quite yet. But the argument of this piece was that, in the same way that the passengers on Flight 93 on 9/11 decided that they might as well risk it all and storm the cockpit in order to, which would probably lead to all of their deaths, but could avert an even bigger catastrophe. Trump, the 2016 election presented a choice between possible total catastrophe, the election of Hillary Clinton to the presidency, and then this sort of crazy gambit that we might as well support it because the alternative is just so horrible to contemplate, which is getting on board with Trump. Is that
getting on board? Yeah. So it's like Hillary Clinton is sort of certain death, according to this essay, right? Electing her, she's just going to run the country. It's going to be the end of America. But if we
so that's
take
like that's the plane crashing into the Capitol or something.
Yeah.
But
it's, I mean, it's so repulsive, right? Like, it's hard to talk about this. It's like you can kind of lose sight of just how vicious this whole thing is.
It's pretty nuts. But this is a very influential.
So Democrats are like terrorists. Yeah. And so, but you can take your chances with Trump and see what happens, right? Because it's got to be better than that. Anything's better than that. And so,
or at least it can't be worse. Like, we might die anyway. But.
Yeah, we might die anyway, but it can't be worse. So, so he writes this thing, and it's all in flowery language. I mean, Anton, it's really weird to read Anton, and he's still pumping this stuff out. But so he's got his, so that took off. And then, I mean, this is sort of fast forward 4 years, and he's still at it. And then, but in the months leading up to the 2020 election, I mean, he went to work with the administration for a little while and has his own story.
Yeah, so he was on the National Security Council as like a communications person or something, which I guess means he was working on messaging mostly for the NSC.
Yeah, and I think that, and then he got ousted, and I don't know the backstory there, but
he was one of the few people who was Claremont associated who actually did go to the White House. So, I mean, usually there's like these think tanks sort of, in many ways, a lot of think tanks operate as sort of like the holding ground for people who like cycle in and out of administrations. So like people go to the Center of American Progress or Brookings or something, like after Obama's term ended, and then those people like go back into working in the administration.
Yeah.
And so the Heritage Foundation was like the big traditional conservative think tank sort of operation. They there just weren't enough. Basically, there weren't enough people who were Trumpists in 2016 to sort of form the cadre of assistant deputy, secretary, whatever. So they brought a lot of like the people who would have staffed the Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio administration at the like mid-tier level. Like those people came in, but then Anton was one of the few people who was like an actual like rah-rah Trump guy in the intellectual world coming in to work at the White House.
Yeah. I don't think there wasn't a lot of that coming from the Claremont Institute. I think that the Trump administration had a pretty hard time with their staffing at the beginning. And so they were, but, I just like, I don't think Anton had much to do. He had written a book about Machiavellian clothes, before, and he was a financier. So, but it's not like he was sitting there at the Claremont Institute before all this happened, I don't think, and like thinking about good policy. And so like, this is not, but they must have been grateful to, who knows how he got in there, but it didn't last that long. And
yeah, he left. So you mentioned that. I actually pulled this out. So, and I think this is sort of revealing. So, okay. So Anton both wrote Flight 93 election under a Latin pseudonym, so as if he's like, one of the founding fathers or something, writing the Federalist Papers. But then he also published this book called The Suit, A Machiavellian Approach to Men's Style, under the pseudonym Nicholas Anton Giovanni, that came out in 2006. And so this is a man who has two prominent publications under different pseudonyms. And then this is for Wikipedia. Anton is a classically trained chef. After resigning from the National Security Council in 2018, he came back to the White House for a day to work as a line cook in the kitchen, helping prepare a state dinner for President Emmanuel Macron of France. He is also an aesthete with a penchant for classical men's tailoring and fashion, having authored a short book and over 40,000 posts on internet bulletin board styleforum.com on the subject. So that's Michael Anton. So a guy who was writing about men's style and then somehow ends up on the National Security Council. And so this, something I've been talking about for a while, maybe the viewers are sick of this at this point, is like cosplay, American life becoming cosplay. And so Michael Anton is sort of like a cosplayer. So he's like, he's literally into like fashion and adornment, and he's an aesthete, and he's pretending to be a chef. And so he's also sort of pretending to be like Publius, and he's pretending to be a founding father. And he's sort of like trying on these different outfits, sometimes literally, if he's right.
I mean, he must be having a great time. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, if you look at a photo of him, he's usually wearing a much nicer suit than I've ever worn. But it is sort of like it's sort of like a play acting, live action role play, LARP cosplay sort of thing. But then like it had like this catastrophic success.
Yeah, I know it, and he's not like, I don't think he thinks of himself as doing that, right? I think he thinks he's kind of masterminding the universe with behind the scenes with his special writings and his cool connections. I mean, and they are, I mean, I guess we could get to the piece, but they've started a new think tank and I mean, in the piece, I try to kind of show Anton's kind of a middling intellectual figure, I'd say, right, in the whole scheme of things. I think he has. I don't mean to be a snob about this stuff, okay, but like but I think he's got a PhD somewhere, but it's not like he's some professor at some place, right? And so the piece, I try to sort of show how from the upper echelons of this think tank. And then where there's some real scholars who are making sort of semi-serious arguments in defense of a lot of this stuff, how that works quite consistently, these sort of very genteel accounts of things and the divisions in our country, and Charles Kessler, for example, who's the editor of the Claremont Review of Books, which is the most serious publication. Right. I mean, he's got a book called The Crisis of the Two Constitutions, where he's basically saying, like, we're a house divided again. And basically, like, you can't go on like this. Right. Because there's the progressive constitution and then there's the founders constitution, and it can't work together. So we're on the precipice of disaster. And so you've got that sort of learned perspective. And then you've got him defending sort of some of the stuff with Stop the Steal. That's sort of the most genteel version. And then you've got sort of Michael Anton, who's fomenting this idea that there's a Biden coup way before the election, right? And you've got him and you know, all over citing these other conspiratorial sites with other Claremont affiliates and stuff. So you've got him sort of creating that discourse and fomenting it while pretending kind of to just be sort of doing something straightforward. You've got Anton doing that. And then you've got sort of these other parts of the Claremont world where you've got people publishing really, really dangerous sort of rhetorical stuff that, I mean, I talk about this one essay by Glenn Elmers from the spring or maybe the winter, where it's basically just like a fascist rant, right, about the broken America. And then you've got sort of these
I just you know, the term like fascism has been thrown around a lot over the past 5 years, and the whole debate about, like, was Trump a fascist, like, is MAGA sort of a proto-fascism, like the things you highlight from this essay by this guy Glenn Elmers, it really like this is sort of a proto-fascism that he's sort of calling for, of like purging the like he's saying more than half of America are not actual Americans and they like need to be purged basically. And so this is pretty gross stuff, and I guess this ran on the American Mind, which is there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he says they should be purged, and I mean, I guess it's important to be careful, right? But I mean, it's like the language he uses to describe basically all Democrats or anyone who voted for Biden is not America, is like a zombie, is a monster, and then it gets really ugly. I mean, people. He said something about the young woman who read a poem at the inauguration. Yeah. He's like if you were like maybe you worm like people with a worm like existence, you know, like this sort of thing, but like the real people don't. And wait, so who is okay? Well, Glenn Elmers, who is this guy? Like, how does he come to write a piece like this that gets published at the August American Mind outlet? Well, I mean, in a way, I don't think he's much of anybody, right? So, I mean, I think I believe he was a student of Kessler's, though I should double check that, and he's got a master's degree. I think he might have worked in government at some point. But I mean, I think that they are he's got a book coming out about Harry Jaffa, is my understanding, with the same press that Charles Kessler's book is coming out with, which is Encounter Books, I think, which is led by Roger Kimball. And so I think that I don't think he was anyone, especially. Okay. So he's right.
The Claremont Institute says that he is a visiting research scholar at Hillsdale College, and you can explain what the link is there. I think Hillsdale is sort of an evangelical private college, and is writing a book on the scholarship of Harry Jaffa, served as speechwriter for the U.S. Secretary of Energy. So all those memorable speeches that the Energy Secretary gave, we can credit some of those great lines to Glenn Elmers, and contribute to various. So he has a BA and an MA. MA in political philosophy from Claremont Graduate School. So and also, I was looking at the Wikipedia for Anton. He also has an MA from Claremont Graduate School. So I guess that's sort of like the funnel for some of these people. Claremont Graduate Institution is like a legitimate place, but then some of them sort of get siphoned into this more kooky, like conservative activist area.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Claremont Institute is turning them into people with some clout, right, and sort of legitimizing them, and giving them a platform. I mean, they're probably just buddies with these people, right? And so they've decided to publish Glenn Elmer's crazy rant. I mean, militaristic and racist and all the, I mean, just really divisive and gross, right? Which is of a piece with a lot of the other stuff. But so they're elevating this guy. He's published in the Claremont Review of Books this in the current issue, I believe. I saw his name alongside Michael Anton. So
he also has written in Modern Age, Law and Liberty, and American Greatness. And I only recognize American Greatness. That's sort of they tried to start a sort of magazine of Trump studies kind of thing of like true believers. And so that, I mean, that's not a peer-reviewed journal kind of thing. But anyway, and it's funny just looking at, if you just look at this guy's bio page at Claremont, he just, I mean, he looks like a, you know, sort of a lawyer from Milwaukee or something. Like he's just you know, very sort of nondescript guy with a light beard and slightly balding, and you know, we shouldn't like infer anything from the way people look, but it's just, I mean, it's sort of, there's an absurd aspect and a stupid aspect to all this thing, and it's like, you know, this guy who seems very mild-mannered, and it's not. Oh
yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, look at all of these people with their pictures and stuff. You're just like, what is going on here?
So it's not banality of evil, but it's sort of like, I don't know. Okay, so another question I had is sort of like, who's the audience for all this? Like, who is the intended audience? Because it makes sense. Like, the Federalist clearly has an audience, and National Review has an audience, and Fox News and OANN and Newsmax all have audiences. But who is sort of like going for this content? Who is being convinced by this content? Like, you know, there weren't a lot of people who were like intellectually swayed through intellectual arguments to support Donald Trump. It was mostly like they already supported him. They liked what he was saying. He told the truth, blah, blah. Or they're like, well, I don't really like him, but he's the Republican, so I'm just going to support him for that reason. But it's like, it almost seems like this is sort of like a weird closed loop that's sort of, they're all talking to each other and like convincing each other, but who's reading
Well,
it?
I mean, I think there's some of that. I think that what I haven't quite talked about, which I try to sort of do a little bit with in the bottom of the end of the piece, is just that this is sort of the tip of the iceberg in the Claremont universe, and they're sort of reaching out. They've got a lot of these fellows they're bringing on, like Jack Posobiec and Kirk. They have huge, or Jack White is one this year. That guy. They've got these.
This is not Jack White of the White Stripes.
No, different one.
Okay.
They've got a pretty big online presence, right? So these are kind of alt-right influencers in many instances. So I think, and there's the American Greatness website that you mentioned, and the American Mind are kind of, those are both. American Greatness is not officially with Claremont, but I think the funding is probably the same, and there's a ton of overlap. And then American Mind is officially the blog of the Claremont Institute. And so those, I don't know exactly the reach of these places, but they've got a pretty, I think that they're sort of tapping into this sort of online networked universe of the alt-right pretty open, like pretty obviously. And so I think that ultimately what you have is a bunch of people who are really well read in some weird ways in the American founding and in some of these traditions, and in some cases in sort of Roman philosophy and stuff, right? Maybe not very well read, but pretty well read relative to most of us, right? And sort of they are using these arguments to, I think that what happens is those arguments sound quite attractive and smart in a lot of different contexts. So the audience, I mean, I think your average Republican voter, and I don't mean to demean any Republican voter. I mean, I think your average voter, some of those things can sound very fascinating and appealing when you're talking about what James Madison said about this or that, or Thomas Jefferson, you know, this, and then, or Lincoln or Frederick Douglass. They've got all this stuff at their fingertips, or Publius or whatever, right? Like you've got, and stories that they can tell and anecdotes they can discuss. Or, I mean, they're always talking about Aristotle. I mean, it's the most from my perspective, it's the most disingenuous garbage, right? And And I don't think any of but I think that can just sound, I mean, that kind of sophistication is extremely powerful rhetorically. I think that we sort of fail to recognize that sometimes.
Okay, so are there people, so it's like, there are people who actually want to read about Aristotle and maybe want to learn about Aristotle. And then there's people who, I guess they hear the name Aristotle and like, oh, that was a smart guy. I suppose whatever I'm reading right now is probably pretty smart as well if they know something about Aristotle. Yeah. And so it's more like that because, who's really like, it's sort of like, the neocons had like no popular constituency. And that's why, one of the weird things about them, it's like, and the NeverTrumpers were like 3 or 4% of the party seemingly. So it's sort of like, I don't know. There is something strange about it. That, so they're giving Charlie Kirk some like quotes he can like throw out at the TPUSA convention or something, but like all this like contemplation of the deep texts and reading the Federalist Papers or something. Is it all just sort of like to fool the rubes and like make it seem like there's some intellectual sheen on this? Maybe I'm getting too far to like sort of.
No, I mean, I think that you don't get, I think it's genuinely perplexing, right? I think that the people at the top, I think they're in a kind of intellectual silo where there's not really many people challenging any of what they're saying seriously. Okay. So they've bought into all this stuff. So they sincerely, it's not just, I mean, I think for Anton and some of these people, it might be a little bit of the kind of cosplay stuff. Like it's kind of like a lark for them. But I think for a lot of them, it's much more serious and based in convictions and a belief in sort of traditions and Western civ, right? And the need for these kinds of sort of, noble lie is probably about right? Where they really believe that it's necessary. And so they want to promote that however they can, in whichever way they can. And I think it's also, you look at somebody like, what's Peterson, right? That guy. Jordan Peterson. I mean, his books have sold millions of copies, right? I mean, a huge phenomenon. He's not taken seriously, and I think you can open it by like intellectuals typically, right? Like you can open his book and find just weird problems and interpretive missteps, but it's highly appealing. He's definitely tapped into something powerful in the morality of young men, right? Especially many conservatives, I would assume. And so I think that there's something deeply appealing about that kind of language and that they're completely comfortable with, right? There's a kind of whole moral universe that these people and political universe that these people are about, the great statesman and the need for prudence and, right, that they're very comfortable with. And I think it's easy to underestimate how appealing that is if you don't feel that way.
Okay, thinking about them as sort of the political analog to Jordan Peterson is interesting because, the thing, we don't need to go off on a Jordan Peterson tangent, but like, he famously, one of his like precepts is clean your room. And that's like the most basic thing that a mother says to a 7-year-old is clean your room. But I guess Peterson sort of framed it and in a way such that, and his like presentation. And so he makes it seem like this deep statement. And like, if Jordan Peterson says, well, Carl Jung and the ancient myths and, the Disney cartoons are all telling you to clean your room, I guess it sort of resonates in a different way with a certain subset of people. And so maybe there's something there.
A certain massive subset of people, right? Who maybe haven't, I guess I'm pretty sympathetic to the view that there is some sort of there's some genuine alienation and vacuum there, right? And so that people haven't been exposed to these kinds of arguments or these texts, and so they get a shallow, botched version of it, and they can't tell the difference. I'm not. Yeah, I like I say, I find it personally repulsive. But
okay, so let's talk about two things that are associated with Claremont, and that is the 1776 Commission and the Garden of American Heroes. And so the 1776 Commission was a seeming reaction to the 1619 Project, and it was this like 40 or so page document that was brought together by presidential proclamation. Okay, one of the few hard copies, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Although maybe they stack them up. They're all in like a unused locker or something in Claremont, California. But
or Hillsdale.
And so this was sort of a rebuttal, and it was sort of like, I guess it was it became a Claremont project, so the guy who this is actually from Wikipedia. The chair was Larry Arnn, A-R-N-N, the president of the conservative Hillsdale College, who was also a Claremont type guy. The co-chair was Carol Swain, a black conservative who was a former professor at Vanderbilt Law School. Carol Swain was actually a guest on Glenn Lowry's show roughly a year ago. I'd never heard of her before, and people can check out that episode and make what determinations they want about Carol Swain, but not a historian. And then I guess a lot of people who were involved with drafting this document were also Claremont people. And so what is your view of the 1776 Commission report?
Well, I mean, I have a bit of, I sort of take it to task a little bit in the piece for just having sort of being really, I think it's highly sort of partisan in weird ways and just really gives short shrift to, Black history and sort of I could list the problems with it, but I think people have seen those problems, right? There's they just gloss over all these really difficult eras and
I would the word that comes to mind is tendentious.
And just weird. Like it's really weird the way they lump together progressives and fascists and communists and all these things and racists as like that those are the major threats that are all sort of, there's a kind of equivalence there built into it. I think you can read through the document and learn some things. And just like I can read Charles Kessler's new book and learn some things, but there's just there's a real kind of glibness. And I mean, sometimes it just strikes me as just sort of weird ignorance, the way they talk about history. Like they just kind of, so I haven't looked at this in a while, but there's just, the way they kind of talk about Reconstruction as I think there's a couple paragraphs there, right? But it's like, that was 100 years of like authoritarian oppression, right? Almost like after when Reconstruction failed. So it's like, that's not something you get to just say, but like history marched on and everything was upwards, like that actually matters, right? That there was that, huge stretch that after the Civil War, things weren't just fixed. So I think that there's a kind of a real obfuscation that happens with what they choose to include and what they don't include. And it's the same with these guys are kind of, again, it's not even clear where they stand on the Civil Rights Act. I mean, they have this, they basically are of the line that it was okay to enshrine voting rights in the 60s, but then after that, it's just been completely a reversal of fortunes where now it's all anti-white racism and affirmative action. And that's been, it's historically really bonkers and ignorant, I think. And so, I think it all coheres in a kind of, that's how they genuinely think about this stuff. It's become this dogma where they won't open their eyes to some of these historical realities. But I had one person, so I don't know if that's helpful or what else there is to say about the 1776 report. But yeah, Larry Arnn, who's the head of the commission, is one of the founders of the Claremont Institute, and he's the president of Hillsdale College.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, it's strange that this, Trump ordered this. I mean, getting into Trump psychology is always tricky. It's a sort of a black box. But why did he care about this in particular? Who convinced him that this is what he should do, is appoint this historical commission? Like, this is weird. And then the fact that the report came out January 18th or something, and then was immediately withdrawn. So I guess these guys are sort of I as a procrastinator myself, I would usually finish my, college papers at 3 a.m. the night before. Yeah. So I had that sort of feel to it.
They probably thought they were going to win the election and that they were going to get spend more time on it.
Have a couple more years to wrap it all up.
And to really do it and to do a beautiful job.
Good. That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then Biden withdrew it very quickly. And then this is sort of related to the Guardian of American Heroes, which is what Know Your Enemy was goofing on in their title. And this is another strange thing, but I guess this is thought to also be sort of a Claremont sort of
production.
Enterprise. I mean, you can see how they convinced Trump that it would be like he would be building something with all these cool statues and be like a tourist attraction that would be very appealing to Trump. But also like it's just it's strange. And so I was going back, and the Wikipedia page has the list of all the people, and I'm just going to read. So I pulled out a little chunk of the people. So there was this plan to create a new sort of national monument type thing with statues of great Americans, going back to the founding or before. And they released this very long list. And so this is just an excerpt. These are from the H's, okay? Alphabetical order.
Yeah, okay.
Ernest Hemingway, Patrick Henry, Charlton Heston, Alfred Hitchcock, Billie Holiday, Bob Hope, Johns Hopkins, Grace Hopper, Sam Houston, Whitney Houston. So I ended there because that's such a great pairing of Sam Houston and Whitney Houston, both great Americans, I guess. But it's like, okay, so this wasn't like a sort of like alt-right sort of like the white people are great sort of thing. Like, this is a real weird hodgepodge that includes, white men, white women, Grace Hopper, who has a residential college named after Yale. I believe she was a mathematician and was in the Navy, I think. And then like Sam Houston and also Whitney Houston and Bob Hope and Alfred Hitchcock. I don't think is an American. Did he ever have American citizenship? He's British, I believe. And so it's just a strange grouping. And so you can't just say like, well, they wanted us to think that like white men did everything great in history.
Yeah, no,
like it's not that, because like
totally
Sandra is here, and is Billie Holiday and Charlton Heston. And so like, where did this? What are your thoughts on this strange thing?
On this, I mean, I think that you're right in that it points to. I mean, I don't want to give them too much. I mean, I think that it's not a straightforward. That list is really interesting and bizarre, right? I mean, it's kind of, it's just weird to imagine them sitting there coming up with it. But I mean, I think that these are not straight. I think that the Claremont people truly believe in the American principles, right? Of like equality and racial equality too. I think many of them do, right? But I think that they're still dabbling and adjacent to just really vicious stuff. And I think that a lot of their the ways in which their minds work are I mean, I don't want to. I think that they are kind of adjacent. I don't want to just say that they're racist, because that's cheap and it's not that simple, right? But I think that they're kind of and it's hard to not sort of fall into tropes that are. I don't want to just fall into simple groupthink talk, right? Of the left. But I think that I think that they're sort of
like this is not white nationalism. They did not want to build a monument to white nationalism. Well, it's not straightforward
white nationalism, but I think it kind of is in practice. I mean, I think a lot of what I try to reveal in the piece is that they have all of these ideas and all of these principles that and these very abstract ideas in many instances that they believe deeply. But that some of the nature of those convictions allows them and leads them to turn a blind eye to the realities around them, not just in the present, but all throughout history, right? And so they'll say that they're even-minded and that they're egalitarians, but they don't want to look at any of this stuff. They don't want to listen to Nicole Hannah-Jones, right? They can't. They definitely don't want that, yeah. They hate Ibram Kendi. There's no benefit of the doubt to anyone, right? And of that, who's coming from the left or who's Black, it seems to me, who has a more radical account of things. And they don't even have the imagination they don't even have sort of that much power of imagination that they're willing to kind of imagine what it might be like if you're the descendant of a slave, right? To think about the American founding, right? Like, it's not that hard to think a little differently about it, right? And so to me, I mean, yeah, they're not white nationalists, but they're certainly happy to pal up with many white nationalists and to support their work and to not condemn it, right? And that's maybe just practical involvement, but I think it has a lot to do with the nature of their particular convictions and ideals and just the kind of grooves that have worked into their minds and their sort of habits of thinking, right? That they're just kind of unable to process some of these realities and to confront it.
Yeah, I mean, someone needs to like like go deep and figure out like how like sort of using this National Guard of American Heroes, and the thing itself was like quickly withdrawn by the Biden administration. So sadly, we're not going to get this great new exhibit. I'm just looking through like how did this happen? Who made the list? What were they thinking about? What were they trying to do? Know. I mean, I'm just looking at the names. Like Muhammad Ali is on there. Is that someone who actively opposed a lot of like American domestic and foreign policy throughout his life? And so they include a black Muslim who, you know, famously said, you know, who went to jail instead of serving the armed forces in Vietnam. And then like, so maybe this list was just like they're trying to think of just like famous people because Trump likes famous people. Because
maybe Trump made the list. Maybe he really did. Maybe he was the one who crafted the list. But then there's
these obscure. So then Woody Guthrie is on the list. I mean, why would a bunch of conservatives want to put a statue of Woody Guthrie? Like,
I sort of think we should. I like this project. And I think that Biden should take it up, and I mean,
it would be kind of like it's not the worst idea that Trump had by far, and maybe it's above the median, you know, in terms of all the ideas he had, and like there are plenty of good things about this country, and we should be celebrating, you know, great things that happened in the past. And I mean, I guess this was sort of inspired by like people tearing down statues and monuments.
Nikola Tesla. Oh, I didn't know he came to the United States.
He was definitely not an American citizen, I'm pretty sure. No. He died in New York City, I believe. But yeah, so, right. I mean, this is just a strange... Listen, you know, like I said, Sacagawea is on here, and as is Elvis Presley. Like, it's just so strange. Yeah. I mean, Barbara Jordan, like that, Elia Kazan, like Chief Joseph. This is a hodgepodge. It's like pulling names out of a hat. But it would be kind of cool if there was somewhere where like everyone could go and learn about all these people. And there's plenty of people who are on here who are obscure, and I was just like, looking at their Wikipedia entries. And so, you know, I don't know who Louise McManus is, but she was the first nurse to earn a PhD. So that's an interesting person.
Yeah, Ida B. Wells is on here, you know?
Yeah, Ida B. Wells, the hero of Nicole Hannah-Jones. So it's just so strange. But sadly, this is not going to happen. Maybe Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos can try to put this thing together at some point. Maybe it can orbit the globe and it could be like a tourist visit, you know, stop off.
Or we could just do little satellite statues.
Yeah, exactly. And you can watch them whiz by. Okay. So, you know, we've gone on for a while, but let me see if there's anything else. I did actually want to bring up this guy you mentioned, Michael Pack, who was actually also appeared on the Glenn Show on Blogging Heads. And I guess he's a director. He's directed a lot of documentaries about conservatives. And so when he was on Blogging Heads last year, he was talking about a documentary of Clarence Thomas that he had directed. And then this guy was appointed to run like whatever, like Radio Free Europe or whatever the umbrella organization for those like outlets, those media outlets that the U.S. government runs, beaming you know, information / propaganda into foreign countries, and then it seemed like he was doing like he immediately like alienated everyone under him and pissed everyone off and just started this huge fight. And there was like he like tried to fire everyone, and there were lawsuits, and it was like a total disaster. And so this guy came from Claremont, right? He was like the media director or something, and then
I think he was the former president. I don't have a deep knowledge of this person, but he was the former president, Claremont.
Okay, so there was a lot. So shortly after he appeared on this platform, you know, in like May 2020, he was appointed to run whatever this umbrella organization is. And then they're very quickly, like, of course, because if you try to fire a bunch of journalists, like they're going to leak to their former colleagues in the press. And so especially NPR was reporting like on all the just strange happenings are happening here. And it seemed like basically this guy, I mean, there's one subplot of the Trump years is like people who thought they could like elevate themselves by associating themselves with Trump, try to do so, and then they end up like with their name as dirt, totally ruined, and Trump is like sailing off, you know, into the sunset. So Michael Pack strikes me as one of these people who thought it would be a good idea to give up his sinecure at Claremont and directing documentaries that you know, PBS would air about conservative grandees of American history, and like get a real job. And then like he totally messed it up. He
got burned.
And now like maybe he did something illegal and like firing all these people. And so who the hell knows? But anyway, his name is his name is Dirt now. And yeah, it was another thing of like someone who was kind of an intellectual trying to ally themselves with Trump and then ending up with mud on their face. So I thought that was noteworthy. And maybe we'll get him, you know, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just the only follow-up I would have to that, and because I don't know much about him, is just that like, I don't know what, I guess for when it comes to sort of the future of all this stuff, I think it's worth noting that Claremont is sort of one hub of this kind of intellectualism. And it's still, there are still sort of well-regarded conservatives who write for the Claremont Review of Books or who attend conferences at the American Political Science Association that are run by the Claremont Institute. But it's sort of one sort of area, a hotspot for this stuff. But it's not like they're the only conservative intellectuals, right, who have supported Trump. They've been the most explicit and sort of the most vocal. But I think that there's a whole sort of group of different, or there's sort of a smattering of others too, who basically were glad for Trump sort of exploding the old establishment and have started to kind of theorize about what a post-liberal America might look like. And I think they're dead serious, right? And so, I mean, it's kind of easy to look at these guys and just think, what a bunch of buffoons, right? But I think that and I think that's true of a lot of the Claremont people, but I think it's really, I mean, I don't mean to get all pedantic, right? But I think it's really easy to sort of look at this and just think, what a bunch of losers, and that can't be real.
It was easy to look at Donald Trump's campaign in 2016 and think, look at these bumbling fools, they can never win. And so, and I think you see sort of some very serious, smart people. Patrick Deneen is one I've written quite a bit about as well. And Yoram Hazony, who is an Israeli-American theorist of nationalism, right? Mm-hmm. And sort of they're all kind of adjacent. They write together. They publish lists together. The petitions and stuff, or like support for this or that with First Things, and sort of they all know each other. And I don't think it's like a cabal or a conspiracy, but I think that the fact that they were willing to kind of get in line behind Trump and not speak out against him means that there's sort of very few limits on what they would or wouldn't support. And so I guess for me, like, I do worry about a real sort of authoritarian candidate on the right. And so, I mean, I don't think Trumpism is easy to replicate. But he's still around, right? For one thing. And the other thing is, I think that for a lot of Republicans, a more centric or sort of a more respectable candidate would also have a lot of appeal that Trump lacked, right? But they might not see some of the dangers there. So I guess, I mean, that's my little plea for, I do think we need to take these guys seriously. I mean, I think it's hard to judge, genuinely hard to judge, right? But I do think there's something kind of alarming, sort of percolating on the right. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, and so these people are sort of laughable in some ways. And Michael Anton writing his book about Machiavelli, men's dress wear or whatever. So that it is sort of like it is laughable. But yeah, he actually was on the National Security Council or whatever. So I just to clarify, so Michael Pack was the CEO of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, so that they supervise Voice of America. And then so he tried firing all these people. They revolted against him, and then he resigned after Biden requested he do so on January 20th, 2021. Okay, so I just want to briefly ask. So you talk about the American Mind, which is their online outlet, as they're sort of like the vanguard in terms of pushing things. The things are more on the edge, and then the Claremont Review of Books is sort of like the staid, austere version of it or something. And so American Mind is edited by this guy James Poulos, who actually used to be a semi-regular on Blogging Heads way back in the day, because he was like an early blogger. I think he was a grad student then, and I didn't ever really know this guy, but I used to consume his stuff, and he struck me as a smart guy who was a little sort of he was a conservative, but he was sort of like a hipster guy, and definitely intelligent and not a kook. And do you have any sense of his transformation into Trumpist propaganda spreader or anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, I don't know any of these people personally. I've met Ryan Williams. I think I was at a conference thing with him one time, who's the new president of Claremont. so, but I haven't really conversed. I don't really know him, or I don't even remember talking to him. So I sort of know people who know them. And so I've heard a few things about, but I mean, I've heard just as much as what you just described about Poulos, and people genuinely perplexed by this turn in his case. And in most cases, frankly, I mean, I think what I see is just a lot of people who are perplexed by all this. And I mean, not saying much necessarily, but a little bit bewildered by what's going on there.
Yeah, and so he like has a PhD from Georgetown. He wrote a popular book about Tocqueville's influence on America, and so maybe not the person you would expect to be like, ultimately responsible for this, like Glenn Elmer's article about the people with their zombie worm-like existence. We need to take the country back from them. So who knows? I mean, James, maybe if you're listening to this and you want to come on, be happy to talk to you about some of these things. And actually, I'm joking, but having him, he was a Belongians guy back in the day, so he might. I probably still have his email somewhere, so maybe I'll try to get him on. It'd be interesting to hear what he has to say. Okay, we've gone on for a while. Does anything? So I think we didn't even touch on some major parts of the essay. So I encourage people to read the essay. You have stuff about a legal scholar who spoke at the rally, the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th, shortly before the storming of the Capitol. And that guy has sort of another type where they sort of allied themselves to Trump, and now they're covered in mud. And also some stuff about the sort of queasy, like racial language that some of their stuff, some of their pieces traffic in. So I encourage people to read that piece. Are you still? Are there more things in this vein that you're working on now? Is there anything you could give us a preview?
Well, I'm sort of mulling over some different things. I don't know. I mean, they made fun of. I think I got trolled a little bit on Twitter because I said it was not that fun, kind of brutal to work on this stuff. But it's true. It's really. I mean, I love writing. So, and I think that it's kind of important to shine a light on some of this stuff. And I have enough of a background that I think it's useful for someone like me to do that. And so I could keep going. I mean, I was thinking of writing a couple pieces on Charles Kessler's new book, but I'm sort of bored of it, honestly. I mean, that sounds really rude, but I just, it's stuff that I don't think is especially serious, but I think has some pretty big implications. So it's hard to want to spend your time doing that. I've got other things I want to work on, but anyway, we'll see. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like simultaneously sort of like a weird curio. And it's like, what are these sort of unusual people thinking? But then like at the same time, someone from Claremont was on the stage on January 6th. Anton, was in there, and it's sort of like, you could see this sort of, becoming one of the dominant strains within conservatism, depending on how things develop from here.
Yeah, it seems like it's obviously worth keeping an eye on, right? But I mean, I have a new respect for a lot of these journalists who spend their time on some these really hard subjects, because it's pretty different than, reading Rousseau or Nietzsche or Aristotle or whatever.
Well, and and a lot of people are doing these esoteric readings, and so they, of the great, philosophers and historians of antiquity and so forth, and so they know the secret truth and so forth. So, okay. So, anything else you want to say before we wrap it up on this subject?
I don't think so. I mean, I'd love it if people would read the essay and send me a note, let me know what they. Yeah,
I encourage people to read it. It's very interesting and well done. And so, okay, if people want to follow your work in the future, where can they do so?
Just Twitter. I guess LCatfield. I'm LCatfield on Twitter. I have a website, lkfield.com too.
Okay, cool. And people can follow me on Twitter, and they'll probably be less insightful. But it's RACW, and they can rate, they can review, they can do all sorts of things. Okay, so thank you, Laura. Thank you again for coming on and taking the time. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks for having me.